Welcome to season 2 of the Front End Nerdery podcast, a podcast about front end development and design. I'm your host, Todd Libby. My guest today is senior accessibility designer Anna E. Cook. You may know Anna from Twitter and tweets about accessibility and design, her terrific talks at conferences you may have attended virtually, and her penchant for ketchup. Anna, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. So could you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Todd mentioned, I'm a senior accessibility designer. I started that role officially in May of 2021, which is 8 or 9 months ago now. And I, before that, was a designer who chose to specialize in accessibility and advocate for accessibility practices in design orgs and in tech orgs alike. So I've been doing that for a while now. I'm a graduate student at the University of Colorado Boulder, focusing on specifically inclusive design, as well as really specializing in accessibility and design. No surprises there. And I guess, right now I'm working on a book on accessibility and design. I stay on brand, obviously, but besides that, in my free time, I, play video games. I'm really into game accessibility too. I've got 2 cats, and usually I'm hiking around Boulder and Colorado a little bit.
Okay. So, well, let's jump right into the questions, shall we? How did you get started in your web development design journey?
I think for me, when I really started out, I was doing things like posting on MySpace, right? And I used to use this thing called Gaia Online, which I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yes.
I used to, I write my little terrible markup and in my posts, and I, make my pages look as emo as possible. And, I was back then, I would use things like InDesign on the school paper. I was really familiar with Photoshop to do all the things I was doing back then, which were, inexplicably terrible designs, but still designs. And so I was really lucky. My high school offered a design course, and I didn't realize that I was interested in design until I took that course. And that kind of set me on this path. And I started that, I started focusing on this really when I was 17. I got my first designer job when I was 20, and that's going to be about 10 years in a few months. And so it's something that I really enjoy because it's this really cool intersection between, or at least at the time, I thought of it as an intersection between art and technology. And now I've come to see of it as more of like a possibility, an equalizer of a place that can provide equity if we choose to let it do so.
Okay, great. I remember Gaia Online. I didn't have any experience with that, but I had several friends that had something to do with that. MySpace was a thing. Yeah, I remember putting up very bad MySpace pages back in back in the day as well. So from there, what are you finding today as in your everyday work, accessibility wise, that you may come across that needs to be improved upon?
Oh goodness, how much time do you have? I mean, as a designer, my perspective is going to be a little bit different. I mentioned this earlier, but I started out as just a designer, and then I chose this specialty, and so that's my perspective. In the organization I'm in, I help folks kind of make their work more accessible. I train them up. We figure out ways we can like look at our design work and make sure that we're actually considering accessibility. And how that might be integrated in design. And I think, I knew this going into every role, especially early on when I was learning about design and accessibility. But designers are generally quite underprepared to discuss accessibility. And I think that's a huge problem because so many decisions are being made in our product management and design teams that can't be undone by development. They can't be undone by QA. And so my biggest sticking point right now is to get our community as designers on a level playing field, because education wise, we didn't get that. And I know that there's been gaps in front end education too, but it's just, I think accessibility in design is way far behind. We don't use semantic, we don't think about semantic code and how that can work in our design. We are constantly reinventing the wheel with things that we could use semantic code for. We're not thinking through the types of users that are, and I'm going on, forgive me, but we're not thinking through users who have disabilities. We're not thinking through what a screen reader experience is like, what a keyboard only experience is like. And many of us don't even know what that means right now. So I think, my biggest sticking point again is getting designers trained on the basics and then finding ways to really enhance experiences across the board.
Yeah, that's so this brings me, what you said brings me back to when I first started out a long time ago, when I was doing design work. And I think back to how much did I put out there that was inaccessible, or in hindsight's 2020. And I remember that now because that going forward for me anyways, that helps me remember, oh, you remember that time, make sure not to repeat that. The biggest thing with me lately is color contrast, so that's the big thing. So
Well, that's the hot topic right now.
That certainly is. So as far as us, everybody as a community, do you think that we're, and I don't want to be all doom and gloom about it, but are we failing as far as design and accessibility goes, or are we on the verge of failing with that we don't have the education piece, and that's the big thing with me, is I've never seen the education piece, as far as boot camps don't provide education, university doesn't provide education, as far as I've seen. I haven't seen that, but how is that in your opinion?
Yeah, I think, well, a couple of things to kind of touch on here. Are we failing? I would say, compared to designers of the past, there's a lot of ways that we're doing things better. And then there's also a lot of ways we're not really thinking about it. Like, the whole Bitcoin NFT space, I know there's just going to be about 10,000 different things that are problematic there. And that's not even just because of the nature of them being crypto and thing in blockchain, but because, spaces like that tend to be a breeding ground for inaccessible and inequitable design decisions. And that's not, again, hope the crypto fan club doesn't come at me for that. I'm just saying that that's a common trend.
Right.
So are we failing? I think, I'd like to say I'm optimistic, but I also know when you're when you're doing this work, and I'm sure you understand this very well too, sometimes it can feel like you're just looking at a tidal wave of things that need to be addressed. And so I am optimistic. I know there's a lot of people who want this, who want to be better at accessibility in their practice, but it's going to take a lot of work to get there. In terms of accessibility education for designers, I did a talk, and I'm doing a talk on this actually for ActsCon in a few months, why we need more accessibility designers. And in the talk, I talk, and I'm talking a lot now, but I talk about how design education has pretty big gaps in terms of accessibility. And as you touched on, right, with boot camps and higher education. In a survey that I pulled, and I am happy to send the reference here, I believe it was around 50% of higher education institutions identified teaching accessibility in their HCI, like human computing interaction programs. But I always, like, when I looked at that information, I was like, what does that mean though? Like, when you say you teach accessibility, are you just saying accessibility is important, like so many of us do, and leaving, the details out? Or are you actually building a robust curriculum with accessibility baked in? So those are the questions I kind of have.
Yeah. So on that, do you think that accessibility is, and I have my own opinion on this, do you think accessibility is undervalued?
Well, of course, yes. I mean, it's just a huge social issue, and it digs in so much deeper than digital accessibility. It's, goodness, we always assume, right, that accessibility is an edge case. We assume that, and we refer to people as edge cases, but people are not edge cases. And particularly when it comes to disability, when 26% of the American population has a disability, according to the CDC, as of 2019, that's even really before COVID, affected us. And when we look at things like that, that's 1 in 4 people. It's not, people are not edge cases. And even if they could be, in this case, they would not be. And so if accessibility is designed to make sure that experiences are working for disabled people and with disabled people, then I think it's hugely undervalued in so many circumstances, not even just in our context, like educational institutions, work environments, things like that. It's pretty systemic.
Yeah. Because I know, and I have the same feeling as you do, that, when we look on Twitter and we see an image that doesn't have alt text,
So many.
or the latest example for me was it was an image on Instagram that had a gray background, but it had a lighter gray font on it, that it ended up being, and of course I instantly go to the color contrast checker. It had a 1.35 to 1 ratio, and it's like, it's frustrating. And I look at this and I say, well, they don't value accessibility. They don't, I guess because lately I've been thinking a lot more of the people that we either advocate for, who we create things for. We've seen developers that don't take into consideration the users, and they're designing or developing for themselves. Oh, it works on my machine. It's that kind of thing. So that, that's why I asked. So with that being said, how do we, as you and I and everybody else that advocates, how do we, if people are listening that want to know or don't know, how do we start advocating in a proactive kind of manner for accessibility?
I think, everybody has different approaches for this. And, I think that the beauty of the accessibility community is that we see different people have those different approaches, and that different approaches work better in different contexts. So, but, like certain organizations, they'll bring in folks who have disabilities to do testing, and will have their product teams see, or watch, what is happening with those users, so that they can understand just how deeply impactful those barriers can be. And, that firsthand interaction, I think, is one of the core parts of advocacy, excuse me. But then, like, well, how do you get to the point where you can actually get somebody in the room, right, to have those conversations and do testing? Because so many organizations are struggling with user testing as it is. And so I think, the way, and I won't say that I've had a perfect approach, because I can't say any approach is perfect.
Yeah.
But I try to emphasize being persistent and constant, and yes, as kind as possible. Though it can, it can be hard, because especially if you have disabilities, and the disabilities you have are being affected by these contexts, it can be difficult to hear somebody be like, well, we don't have users like this, when you're like, I am right here, thank you very much. But
yeah,
the constant reminders, right? Going, okay, did we check this? Did we check this? Did we do this? And starting to really show them that it can be baked in, and that there are ways to work through these problems the way that we work through all design problems. And so I think that's what I've seen work best for me, is just to be, as I heard Soren Lambie, I think that's their full name, Soren Lambie, put it, I'm the Jiminy Cricket of accessibility. You're just there, and you remind them, and you be patient, and you be kind, because there's going to be endless conversations like that.
Yeah. So I want to swing around here to, you have, and you mentioned it earlier, a conference talk coming up at AxCon. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the talk is called Why We Need More Accessibility Designers. And I think, it's something I put together in part because I kept getting these requests, people being like, we need somebody like you, and we need more people on our team that can do this. Can you show us who else is able to do this? Or can you do this work for us? And as as you probably gathered at the beginning, I'm pretty busy as it is. And so the answer for me is like, I can't help you. I'm sorry. And the problem is that, I want these organizations to have accessibility designers, but designers aren't trained up, and they're not ready. And so we need designers to really understand that there are places that are going to want them to do this work, whether it be by official title like I'm doing now, or in the capacity of their work as a designer in general. And so I really want to have my community understand, as designers, what this can look like and how this can be integrated in our practice, so that individuals and organizations can start creating roles like mine and training people to do the work I do. Not that I don't like being super special and, having that work come my way, but it needs to be more than just a small collective of people. It needs to be a lot of designers. And so in that talk, I talk about education and the gaps. I talk about what happens in our work and how we can make it more accessible, and what an accessibility designer does. And, I think the thing I'll quote here in regards to accessibility designers is something Matt May says: we need a lot of people who know a bit about accessibility, and a few people who know a lot about accessibility. Did I say that right? I think I did. Basically, we need specialists in these roles. We need people to be able to rise to the occasion.
Yeah. So this is going to sound, well, how do we get more people to become accessibility designers, is what I'll ask.
I think my hope is that we will start creating more dedicated training programs, not just in institutions, but by people who are leading in accessibility industry right now, to help designers understand how to integrate this into our practice. And I think that is a starting point where it will help a lot of folks, because right now a lot of accessibility, digital accessibility education is really front end and QA focused, and that's not a bad thing. It's just that the designers are a little bit confused, and collectively it's kind of like we have to kind of dig through things to figure out what exactly applies. So I think as a community, the existing accessibility community will hopefully be able to come together and provide some of those resources, more of those resources, so that designers aren't left kind of trying to figure it out like I felt like I had to kind of figure it out. So I think that's what I would say. And then hopefully organizations actually create these jobs and create, the resources to train folks up.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely agree with you there. So I read I went on DQ's website and checked out the schedule for AxeCon, and I think is where I read part of why I have this next question, which is, why do accessibility issues fall back on designers and QA people? Now, I know the answer to that because I actually am going through an audit right now where I am actually, handing it back to a QA person. But I'm not the designer, of course. I'm the engineer on this. I have been dealing with designers on, for instance, looking over a Figma design, for instance, and, noticing, okay, this needs to change. This color contrast needs to be, more than what you have. So why do accessibility issues fall back on designers and QA people?
Well, I mean, there are some things that developers can adjust and fix with code, but there are plenty of things that they cannot fix with code. Right. And we can't tack on ARIA labels to bad copy. We can't, I mean, we can, but how many times are we going to do that until we realize we can just make the label itself on the input clear? How many times do we need to, as designers, gosh, I just got tongue tied there. The point I'm trying to get at, sorry, is, there are many accessibility issues that developers just can't fix without coming back to designers and saying, hey, can we adjust this? Right. Because otherwise they're going to push it to QA, and then designers are going to be like, this isn't what I gave you. Right. And so then you'll end up with this constant back and forth, and who's supposed to be making the decision here? Well, the designer should have made that decision, and they should have talked with the developer about it, and it shouldn't have been coming up in QA. It should have been happening in the official design phase. And there's more than things like copy. There's, of course, color contrast. There's things like why am I blinking? Header structure. There's things like interaction design concepts, right? What happens on focus? What's the focus flow? What's the reading order? All of those things, they do live in design, whether we as a community have acknowledged it or not.
Yeah, definitely. And that just jogged something in my memory, and now, boom, it's gone.
I understand.
So I'll just ask the next question because I have no idea what I was going to add to that.
If you remember, you just bring it up.
Yeah, I will. So how can we improve in, having designers? Well, I'll just say with designers, how can we improve on getting designers to understand accessibility more?
I mean, there's a lot that needs to happen, but I think some of the first things we should be doing is emphasizing accessibility in our design thinking. I think, designers are really prepared to talk about color contrast. It's so much so that they're ready to use the next hottest tool already. But there's so much more to the work that we do than color contrast. And a lot of those considerations live in our design thinking as it is. So how are we thinking through these problems? What are the structures and the semantics that we're putting together? And I mean semantics like taxonomy and structure and flow. What are the things we're thinking through there? And how are those things supposed to be, accessible? And those aren't always the easy questions to answer, but they're design. That's design in essence. It's like that for all users. It's not like accessibility introduces something more complex than what is already existing in design, because we deal with wicked problems every day. And so I think the biggest thing is to really start getting designers to understand that our users can look many different ways. They can be many different types of people, and that people, we're not averages. None of us are an average body. None of us are an average mind. We are all unique and varied because we are people, and that is our nature. And that's not even some feel-good thing. It's actually studied. Bodies are varied. There's a whole US Air Force study on this as well that I could talk about for 7,000 more hours. That my dad, he really liked that story. He was like, oh, wow. And I told my grandpa about it because he used to be a pilot. But anyway, that was over the holidays. They really enjoyed those ones. But I want designers, I think the biggest thing is to really change their way of thinking about users, and to think about solving for one, a core user who has a disability, and extending to many through that process, as Microsoft outlines in their guidelines, and really thinking through those people, their needs, with them, not just for them, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm rambling.
No, absolutely not. That great stuff here. So now I remembered what I was going to say.
Oh, here we go.
Earlier. So the art, and it's kind of, it's not, I'm not pitching anything here, but the article I wrote on Smashing Magazine, you had said something that reminded me of that. When I wrote, we need to have an accessibility champion in every department in the organization, which would help with the education. And this was the piece that I was trying to remember, was the education through, one person has that knowledge in each department, in the design department, in the marketing department, even in QA, development, etc. And if we have that, we have those people get together, and then that spreads, I think that's one way to have cohesiveness through an organization. And how important do you think it is? And, feel free to add anything on top of that. How important do you think it is to have those people in those departments, or, in the organizations?
Oh, I totally agree with that. And I like that article, by the way. I do share it with people.
Thank you.
I think if we don't have people in those roles, a couple of things are going to happen, right? If we only have a couple of accessibility advocates and they're just overseeing the entire organization, what can happen is, one, accessibility subject matter experts will know things, but they can't possibly know everything about every practice. It's not I mean, I might be biased here, but I don't think it's a fair expectation to have of anybody. And so having, an accessibility expert who's in design, who's in front end, who is in QA, who's, in our product management side, at least having that as a starting point will make sure that we have people who are able to answer questions that are really relevant to the specific audience they're working with, rather than having somebody who is, broadly speaking, able to answer some questions, but isn't always able to understand the context of those questions. And then, of course, if you only have a couple in the entire organization, the first thing that's going to happen is your team's going to get burnt out and they will struggle. It's hard, the work we do, as I'm sure it can be really a lot, especially if you're doing it throughout an entire organization. And so you wouldn't ask, you wouldn't ask two designers to design an entire 5 product organization, customer service organization, or something like that. You would have designers embedded in teams so that they can actually focus on those subjects. So the the long story short, before I go on, is that I totally agree. And even like, as a part of the work I do, I'm hoping to create, more of a guild structure so that designers within different product teams can come and work together. And the same should happen, with development and QA, so that we can come together, notice the trends, and acknowledge them collectively instead of in segments.
Yeah, totally agree on that. So when I was reading the form I had you fill out, something caught my eye, and I think I had read this before somewhere, maybe not, but I am very interested in the accessibility for designers book that was mentioned. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, it's still early.
Okay.
I have 8, 9, 10 chapters out that are not ready to read, but they're ready to be edited. And the hope is that it's going to be released in September of this year. Oh my goodness, I have to get to work. But in this book, I hope to address some of those design thinking challenges and then give designers the ability to start reframing the way they look at their practice and then using that in their workflows. And so that's what we're looking at for the book. I do have I don't know how much I'm allowed to talk about in terms of who's editing it, but I have some really exciting editors. I have a co-author who I'm super jazzed about as well. And there's a lot of work to be done still, but I think one thing I talk about in this book that I'm really interested in discussing more, and I'm excited to see what people think, but it's a concept, designers call, and not just designers, but, we call affordances. And the concept of an affordance is that when we have an object or a material, that the material has a certain quality that assumes a certain capability. And so my hope in this book is to actually reframe a very old design practice of using affordance and thinking about how an object might be different for different types of people and how that object cannot afford the same type of interaction for different types of people. And so affordances as they are very, I'm getting really heady, what's the word I'm looking for? Philosophical, but I believe James Gibson originated the term, and I really want to reframe design thinking in our entire community. And I want to take affordances and kind of turn them over and say, okay, what does this object mean to you? And then what does this object mean to somebody who is blind? What does this object mean to somebody who's in a wheelchair? Because the assumed affordance of an object means a very different thing to a different person. These are my glasses. That's the object I was referring to for some reason. But I hope I don't know, that sounds really in my philosophical. We also have a workbook we're putting together for certain components and things like that. Okay. So there's a lot that's going to be in there. I'm certainly not one for brevity, as you have noticed, probably.
No, that's great stuff. I will be keeping an eye out for that because I'm always looking to, one, not only fill my library of books, but two is learn, by osmosis. So I will definitely keep my eye out for that for sure.
Thank you.
September sounds it seems like it was just September a little while ago, and it was, but it just seemed like it was September maybe a couple months ago. But anyways,
10,000 years ago and a few months ago.
Yeah. So the last question I had before I get to the final 3 questions is something that also piqued my curiosity. Is tell me about riding Japanese sports motorcycles.
I always like including that fun fact because people never expect it from me, and I remember last year I mentioned it during an all hands, and the VP of sales was like, "Excuse me, you ride?" And I right now I don't have a motorcycle because I don't have the space and I don't have the time to ride,
Right.
but I've been riding since I was 14, and I mean like not like without my mother's permission. In fact, she was the one who taught me. And
Okay.
so when I turned 18, like the first thing I did was get a motorcycle license and get a motorcycle. And so I had a Kawasaki Ninja 250.
Okay.
I had two of those actually over the course of however many years. And I really enjoyed writing quite a lot. So I'm hoping to get back into it when I actually have the capacity to have some fun again.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's dangerous. My mom wouldn't, of course, let me go out without wearing 10,000 pounds of gear and helmets, duct
Yeah.
tape. Like I was like that kid from the Christmas Story, like going out. But
Yeah.
it's certainly something that it's more beautiful than you might think.
Mhm.
Riding up a motorcycle in the Rocky Mountains in fall. I'll just say that.
Yeah. Just a sidebar. I took when many cross country drives I have gone through Colorado, and of course Rocky Mountains also, and this beautiful scenery out there. I'd love to get on a bike, motorcycle, bicycle, whatever, and just trek through there. It's very, very beautiful and scenic out there. I didn't do a lot of riding back in the day. I was very reckless as a young whippersnapper. So
Did you ride?
I did a little bit. I did. The Ninja was one of them. I didn't personally have a bike, but I knew people that had bikes, multiple bikes, and they were always willing to let me ride one. Ninjas were one of those bikes. I had a guy I knew that had an Interceptor, and I got on it, and it was probably one of the higher end models, and I just remember giving it a little bit of gas. I went off the back and the bike went the other way. So
Oh gosh.
And back then anyways, I'm 6'5" and about, I don't know, 150 pounds soaking wet. So it was real easy for me to go this way and then the bike to go that way. So
it's actually kind of funny now that you mention it. You kind of brought another inclusive design consideration to mind. I'm 5'1" if I'm on my tippy toes, and so motorcycles aren't really built for, they're not really well, or haven't traditionally been built for women, and they haven't really definitely been built for somebody as small as me. And so every motorcycle I've had to customize it so that, like, shave that seat down and make it work for me. And so I don't know, there's a lot of stuff like that I wish were a little bit different too. I don't want I don't know, a Triumph. Like I want the Kawasaki. I want like the real, I don't know, not to hating on the Triumphs though, but anyway.
Well, I tell you what, I'll take an Indian at any time. Riding an Indian is one of my favorite things to do. I would love to I would either love to ride an older, like a 20s or 30s model at some point, which is on my bucket list, or this is probably never happened, but own one. But anyways, so as we get down here in time, I love to ask these 3 questions to my guests, and they're really easy. You can go into detail if you'd like. One word answers are fine as well. So the first one is, what about the web these days excites you and keeps you excited in what you do?
Well, I think what excites me most about the web, and let me think here. What excites me most is how adaptable interfaces are becoming. And I think they were always adaptable, but it's, I think it changes as a designer, it changes how we should be thinking about design because, you know, suddenly our button color contrast, which is important, suddenly somebody's, out there changing everything as they wish,
Yeah.
and the what we need to do is find ways to support that. And so there's something really pure to me about that, in that we can look at really in-depth user experience and not just continually look at the UI over and over again and go, we plastered some new colors and fonts on there, it's a brand new product, and like really look at the problems, because I feel like those are some, over the past 10 years, sometimes it feels like we've gotten so interface focused that we've forgotten the core of our user experience practice. And sometimes, and God, I sound like an old person, I'm like, those whippersnappers only care about the UI. And the UI is important, don't get me wrong, but there's things like, dark mode, for example, and those types of adaptable interfaces not only are important for accessibility, but they're important for broader inclusivity. And we can look at them and start to realize that if we think about adaptive interfaces, we can really create experiences that are inclusive, not just to people who have government recognized disabilities or official disabilities, but people who are neurodiverse, people who are have migraines, people who are like myself, people who sometimes are more comfortable in certain situations looking at an interface through, or experiencing an interface through a screen reader, even though they may not be blind or low vision. So that's what really excites me right now. And now it should be like Web3 or crypto or Bitcoin or NFTs, but it's not. And I don't know. It's not that it's not cool stuff. It's just there's plenty of other people to be excited about those things for me,
Yes.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I felt that statement when you said migraine sufferers, because I am one of those people myself. I had a bout maybe last week. Yeah, I think it was towards the tail end of last week that yeah, I get that. And dark mode is my friend.
Mhm.
Let's just say that. So the next question is, if there were one thing you could change about the web that we know today, what would that be?
Oh, what would I change about the web that we know today? Well, let me think for a second. I have a spicy answer, I
Okay.
suppose. I think the thing I've been wishing were happening in the web right now is that people who have traditionally been less empowered to make decisions about web experiences and digital experiences be more empowered. Like, I've seen enough of Zuckerberg, I've seen enough of Dorsey, I've seen enough of these tech guys, they've done enough. And that's not to say, like, I don't know, I can't just be like, get out, you're retiring, kid, but like, I wish that the web was a more equitable place and that
Yeah.
it wasn't just sustaining existing power structures, because right now, the way I see it as a lot of the perpetuation of existing systemic issues. And the web was supposed to be a place, right? They wanted it to be a place that could be free, that
Yes.
not free in the way that you like your like Wild West. I don't know how to describe it, but like truly equitable.
Yes.
That was the goal. And right now I don't see that. Right now
Right.
I see a lot of money and a lot of power. And
Yep.
I don't know. It's It's a hard one. I don't know how we'd fix it, but
Yeah.
I have ideas.
Yeah. No, totally agree. And that's not the first person you're not the first person who has said that, by the way.
Oh, really good.
Yes. uh, I asked that because I've had a wide range of answers, and that, I haven't had that many episodes of the podcast, but a few people have said that, so, which I totally agree with. Less people that look like me, and more people that aren't, Zuckerberg, Dorsey, the names that you mentioned, more, Tim Berners-Lee, the web is for everybody.
Hmm.
And like you, I don't feel and I don't see that it is. I mean, we could come back to accessibility and say, okay, well, if the web is for everybody, then why can't people in this certain rural location get internet on their 3G phone because they can't upgrade to a better phone or the newest phone or the newest tablets, or, buy a $6,000 MacBook,
It's so true. It's like, I I don't know how to put it. I mentioned this on Twitter earlier today, and somebody else apparently mentioned it on Twitter yesterday, that I think it'd be good for the tech community to start coming together and start asking for these things from it. It shouldn't come down to individual companies to decide to be ethical or inclusive. It needs to be industry wide, and it needs to be something that isn't being forced on individual contributors to do against huge power structures that are existing, like those that have been perpetuated by Zuckerberg, Dorsey, and other systems of power in tech. So, but then, I start getting into somebody's going to hear this one day and they'll be like, wow, she's really, she's talking about unions probably right now, but, I think things need to change.
Yeah, they do. And maybe we do need unions in tech, because I had, matter of fact, speaking of unions in tech, I've had Mike Montero on, and
He talks about that.
He certainly does. So yeah. The last question is, what is your favorite part of front end development or design that you really like the most, that you nerd out over?
Okay, I think, it's definitely accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that that's the obvious answer because that's my job, but like, it's, it's, to me, it's like really thinking through a problem in a completely different way than I was taught to. And I've learned so much. Like today, right before we joined, I was tweeting about this because I can't stop tweeting apparently, but I was looking at a design and reviewing it, and there was like 10 things I noticed right off the bat that I was like, oh, this should be addressed. And I didn't used to be able to do that. And so it's just really cool to be able to start looking at little things and starting to change things. But I just really enjoy hearing the perspectives of people who are systemically marginalized in ways that I am not. And I don't want to hear bad things, but I want to hear them so I can change things as much as I can. And accessibility is a big part of that. I don't know, I don't want to have like a hero complex, but it'd be good to do something good with this life. I think it feels like that's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. So that is all I have for questions. And so at this point, I'd like to close out the podcast with my guests, letting the listeners know what they currently have going on and where people can find you. So I will hand the reins over to you.
Yeah, well, if you'd like to get in touch with me or, connect with me in any way, you can find me on Twitter at Anna E. Cook, E as in Echo. And then you can find me on LinkedIn at the same name and Medium with the same name. I am very online. I, can't help it. I live alone. We're still in a pandemic. So you can reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn pretty easily. My website is annaecook.com if you want to look at that. Though I want to update that too. So one day. And that's where you can find me online.
Great. I will make sure everything that we've referred to are in the show notes for the episode. And Anna, I want to thank you very much for spending time with me today and coming on and talking accessibility, because I think that we need to talk more about it.
Well, thank you for having me, Todd. I don't think I've ever gotten to meet you in person before. So
we haven't. Yeah. Well, you're welcome. And thank you. No, we haven't. I think it's been just Twitter. This is our actual first meeting, quote unquote. But no, I have enjoyed every minute of our conversation today, and looking forward to that book and that conference talk coming up soon. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, listeners, for tuning in to the Front End Nerdery podcast. I'll be back next time with a new guest, new conversation about front end design development and other topics. If you would please rate this podcast on your podcast device of choice, like, subscribe, and watch on the Front End Nerdery YouTube channel. Links to transcripts and show notes are there. I'm Todd Libby, and this has been the Front End Nerdery podcast. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.